The Marvel Cinematic Universe has been running for 11 years, and is continuing to grow with no signs of stopping. The MCU has gotten to the point where they now release 3 new movies a year, and are about to enter the next phase, introducing us to many new heroes. However, what year presented the best adventures? Many can make a good case for 2014, with Guardians of the Galaxy and Captain America the Winter Soldier. I think Thor and Captain America the First Avenger in 2011 make for an underrated combo. 2018 probably has many fans, what with Black Panther, Avengers Infinity War, and Ant-Man and the Wasp. In my opinion though, it comes down to 2017 and 2019, and in this video I'm going to compare those 2 years. Just a warning, I will go into spoilers. If you have not seen Spider-Man Far From Home yet, or you're someone who just never got around to Avengers Endgame, proceed with caution. The 3 movies of those years can be divided into 3 groups. You have the solo adventure with an all-powerful hero who ends up in another world, the big team movie which started off the summer season, and of course, Spider-Man. In fact, I'm going to start with the 2 Spider-Man movies, because they're the ones I've been going back and forth on, whether I prefer Homecoming or Far From Home. The neat thing about those flicks is how they are essentially high school comedies that just happen to star a superhero. Part of the fun of Homecoming was seeing Peter Parker juggle his schooling with attempting to be a superhero. I mean, that's part of the character's appeal, and I thought director Jon Watts and the screenwriters tapped into that quite nicely. Watching Homecoming again, I also appreciated how the movie showed how the Avengers are viewed among civilians, especially teenagers. Both films also succeed in the humor department, and I got plenty of laughs from watching Homecoming and Far From Home. The decision to have Far From Home sent on a European vacation was a clever one, and allowed us to see Spider-Man hang out in other locales besides New York. Both Spider-Man movies do work as funny, breezy escapades, although I do think Far From Home improves on a few key areas. For one thing, I found Mysterio to be a better villain than Vulture. I don't think Vulture is necessarily a bad villain, as having him be a working-class guy was an interesting creative choice. But Mysterio being someone who can manipulate images on top of Jake Gyllenhaal's performance just made him a more entertaining baddie to me. This also led to better action scenes in Far From Home. The action in Homecoming was okay, with the ferry scene being a standout, but Watts and the visual effects artist took full advantage of Mysterio's abilities and crafted some eye-catching action sequences. So it is a bit of a toss-up for me which Spider-Man movie I prefer, as both present plenty of pleasures, and Tom Holland has proven himself to be an incredibly charming and likable Peter and Spidey. In regards to the other solo movies of 2017 and 2019, I think Thor Ragnarok and Captain Marvel are pretty good. There's quite a bit I like about them, though they don't rise up to great level for me. My enjoyment of Thor Ragnarok comes from Taika Waititi turning the series into a buddy comedy. I like seeing the interactions between Thor and Bruce Banner the Hulk, as well as new character Valkyrie. The movie even throws in Jeff Goldblum as the leader of the planet Sakaar, with Waititi allowing him to go into full-on Goldblum mode, and I'm here for that. I'm a fan of Waititi's independent comedies, like Hunt for the Wilderpeople and What We Do in the Shadows, so I would have liked seeing more of his wild influence on the story, but his humor does come through most of the time. The Sakaar scenes are so much fun though that whenever we cut to the main villain Hela on Asgard, I just want the movie to cut back to whatever Thor is doing. However, I guess those moments are necessary to build up the finale, when Asgard is destroyed and Thor ultimately learns that he doesn't need his hammer. Captain Marvel also develops into a buddy movie, as we see the partnership form between Carol Danvers and Nick Fury. I think those provide the film's most successful parts, and I like seeing Brie Larson and Samuel L. Jackson interact and play off each other. One thing that kept being thrown around by skeptics prior to the film's release was that in the trailers, Carol never smiled or laughed. In the finished film, she smiles frequently, especially in her scenes with Fury, so that all turned out to be hogwash. I actually really like Carol's development throughout the film, and I think it presents an important message. She is continually taught by the Kree to suppress her emotions, and to always be cynical and untrusting of anyone else around her. Cynical people always want the rest of humanity to be just like them, and so to see Carol eventually reject what they brainwashed her to believe is incredibly powerful, and makes the ending all the more satisfying. The depictions of the Skrulls was also great. I like how the filmmakers used the casting of Ben Mendelsohn to immediately identify them as the villains, because he has played so many villains before. When we find out what the Skrulls are really like, that heightens the message of the movie even more. Of course, the movie has a lot of fun with its 90s setting and having Carol use the internet of the day and visiting a blockbuster. While Captain Marvel, for the most part, fits comfortably with plenty of the other Marvel movies, I thought the 90s setting was a nice way to give the film its own distinct feel. I think both Thor Ragnarok and Captain Marvel offered a decent amount of joys and were able to find ways to humanize their ultra-powerful leads. Both movies are almost neck and neck for me, but I might give a slight edge to Thor Ragnarok. Finally, there are the two team movies, which happen to be my favorite Marvel films of their respective years. I also consider Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and Avengers Endgame to be among Marvel Studios' best releases. I thought both movies managed to push the characters to new emotional areas, albeit with slightly different things at stake. With Guardians Volume 2, James Gunn seemed intent on exploring the idea of parentage and an outright rejection of toxic parenting. This is mostly shown through the relationship between Peter Quill and his father Ego. I think Ego is one of the best villains in the MCU, a conniving living planet who, despite his initial friendly demeanor, doesn't actually care about Peter, but instead uses him as another vessel with which to consume other planets and take over the galaxy. The surprising turn with Yondu was a particularly clever device by Gunn. Yondu was an entertaining supporting character in Guardians of the Galaxy, but the sequel nicely showed the connection he and Peter formed for so many of his years in space. The toxic parenting theme also extended to Gamora and Nebula, and the brutal ways in which Thanos raised them. The scenes between them helped show Nebula was more than just a lackey, and made her eventual change believable. Of course, a big part of the appeal of the Guardians movies is the humor. The actors work extremely well off each other, and the decision to separate them into little groups was one that I think paid off. However, despite all the comedy, Guardians Volume 2 somehow felt a little sadder than the first one. Even Rocket Raccoon gets a few standout sad moments, and they're effective. As for Avengers Endgame, that movie delivered in feeling like the culmination of what all the previous Marvel movies were building up to. I was amazed at how Joe and Anthony Russo made every possible right decision with the movie. The sense of, well, now what, at the beginning, to that eventual sliver of hope that Thanos' actions can be reversed, was so well conveyed, and we understand so much what is going through the characters' heads in every given situation. The movie's 3-hour runtime was widely publicized, but I never felt it one bit. The Russos structured the 3 acts superbly, and most impressively was the use of earlier Marvel films. The time travel element could have been gimmicky, but instead becomes one of the most fun parts of the movie. I love how Endgame pretty much becomes an homage to Back to the Future Part 2. Is there plenty of fan service in the movie? Sure, but I thought it was well earned. It ultimately led to an incredibly exciting finale with most of the Avengers coming together and leading to one smile-inducing moment after another. Who can forget Captain America wielding Thor's hammer, or him telling every other on-screen hero to assemble? Plus Scarlet Witch confronting Thanos, Spider-Man riding on Valkyrie's winged horse, and the shot of the female heroes. Something I did not expect with Endgame was how emotional it ended up being, but Tony Stark and Steve Rogers' send-offs made for fitting and worthy ends to their arcs. After Avengers Endgame, it'll be interesting to see where the MCU goes from here. So which Marvel year do I prefer? It's a close one, as both 2017 and 2019 offered plenty of highlights for the series. You had the teenage shenanigans of Spider-Man, the heroic daring-do of Thor Ragnarok and Captain Marvel, and the emotional high points of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and Avengers Endgame. I'm going to give the slight edge to this year, 2019. Good job, Marvel. But now I want to know from you what your favorite MCU year is. Write your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you next time.